Shavua Tov, everyone. Hope you had a great Hanukkah, a bright Hanukkah. Welcome to video number 34 in our WhatsApp story group. I translated and adapted and supplemented the story from the version of the esteemed Uri Kaplun in the Treasury of Hasidic Tales. I call it a Deep Slumber. Rabbi David of Nikolayev was a well-regarded scholar in his generation. Nikolayev, by the way, is the city where the Lubavitcher Rebbe was born. His grandfather was the chief rabbi there. One time, Rabbi David of Nikolayev met an old friend of his from childhood, and his old friend wanted to know what led Rabbi David to become a follower of the Baal Sherm Tov. In answer, Rabbi David told him the following story. David related, I heard of the Baal Sherm Tov, and I decided to investigate to see if he was someone that would attract me, somebody who could be my Rebbe. I went and I was impressed, but I felt it wasn't for me. His Hasidim there persuaded me that I should stay till Shabbos. If I heard the Baal Sherm Tov on the afternoon before Shabbos reciting Shir HaShirim in his private room, that would certainly attract me. So I agreed. I changed my plans. I stayed until Shabbat. On Erev Shabbat, I positioned myself where I could hear the Baal Sherm Tov reciting Shir HaShirim, and to tell you the truth, it was sublime, and I could even tell that it made a clamor in the heavens. But it wasn't for me. I didn't feel connected, so I was going to leave. Then the Hasidim told me, no, you have to stay till tomorrow night. Tomorrow night he has yortzeit for one of his parents, and he will pace back and forth in his room and recite the entire Mishnah by heart. Well, I agreed, and I was admitted to the Baal Sherm Tov's room, and I said the entire Mishnah with an extraordinary fervor. And I was very impressed, but that wasn't it. Now they said that I have to stay. They insisted I stay another day because the night after the yortzeit, he would give an extraordinary discourse, a very deep mystical discourse. But they warned me that that I should be very careful at the table during the meal when he gives the discourse to guard myself that I shouldn't fall asleep. This intrigued me, and I decided to stay for this also. And I took a long nap during the day to make sure I wouldn't be sleepy at night. And when I got there, so they gave me a place at the table. The Baal Sherm Tov sat at the head of the table, surrounded by his Hasidim, and he began a deep Kabbalistic explanation of the kavanot, of the intentions and the focus that one should have when immersing in the mikveh. At one point, though, he was interrupted by one of his Hasidim who said, "But Rebbe, doesn't the holy Ari of Sfat, from whose teachings in Kabbalah Hasidus is based, doesn't the holy Ari teach the kavanas of the mikveh differently?" The Baal Sherm Tov paused. His face, when he was speaking, had been like a fiery flame, but at the words at the challenge of his Hasid, his face turned pale. And his eyes bulged, and there was a tense but refined air in the room, and all of a sudden I felt overwhelmed by sleepiness, and I tried to fight it off, and I couldn't. I fell asleep, and I had a dream. I found myself in a city unknown to me, and I saw a number of Jews running through the street. I asked them, where are they going? They said the Baal Sherm Tov is about to begin a mystical discourse, and so I ran along with them, and we entered the building, and there was in the middle of the room was set a table with two chairs, and a young man was sitting in the second chair. I recognized the Baal Sherm Tov who was sitting in the first chair. And I asked the person next to me, who is that young man sitting in the second chair? And he said, that's the holy Ari of Sfat. The Baal Sherm Tov launched into a deep mystical presentation about the kavanas of a mikveh, just as he had when I was awake. And this time it was the Ri himself who at some point challenged him and presented his own theories of what should be the kavanas of the mikveh. And there was an incredible discussion back and forth between the two of them. Finally, the Holy Ari conceded that the kavanas that the Baal Sherm Tov expressed were appropriate for the generation in which the Baal Sherm Tov lived. At that point I awoke, and I found myself still at the table with the Baal Sherm Tov. I looked at him, and the color was returning to his face. And not once again, but he continued where he left off in his explanations of the kavanas of the mikveh. And again, the same Chassid interrupted him and said, but the Ari says differently. Whereupon the Baal Sherm Tov turned towards me and said, Rab David, stand up and testify to what you have seen. At that moment, I was magnetically attached to him from that moment on. And indeed, we know that Rabbi David of Nikolaya became one of the main disciples of the Baal Sherm Tov within his inner circle of, I don't remember if it was 30 great disciples or 60 great disciples.